You are a commuter on the London Underground. You sit down, grab the newspaper on the seat and turn to the puzzle section. What should you solve on your journey to work? You're guaranteed to find a Sudoku, an easy-to-learn logic game, fast to solve and rewardingly precise. You'll find a crossword, the staple word game, a great test of your vocabulary. Depending on the paper, you might also come across a word search, cryptogram, chess puzzle, or word ladder. All great options. Even if you haven't solved them before, the rules can be explained to you in a few sentences and you're good to go. There'll be another puzzle there though, staring back at you, goading you on. Solve me, I dare you. The Cryptic Crossword. If you are like most people, you'll stare at it for a second, decide that it's stupid and doesn't make any sense, then go and solve the Sudoku. But if you're the curious type, or maybe just a little insane, you'll get out your phone, search up a tutorial, and click on this video. Well, I'm here to tell you that you did the right thing. Sure, cryptics are confusing at first and pretty hard to explain, but once you understand them, you'll find that they're the most elegant and satisfying puzzles ever created. And that's a non-biased opinion from someone whose job it is to make them. Look, cryptics are really confusing. Some of the most common criticism I get on this channel is something along the lines of, what is going on? These puzzles are for crazy people. You're a crazy person. Seeing a cryptic for the first time feels like you're reading a different language. And here's the thing, you sort of are. So this will be a short video series teaching you everything you need to know about cryptic crosswords. The first video will be all you need to know to get started. Watch this to the end and you'll be able to solve a cryptic. The following videos will get really into the nitty-gritty, looking at everything I cover here in piecemeal with examples to boot. So let's get into it and start with the first question that most people would ask. What is the difference between a standard crossword and a cryptic? Here are two clues for the word blend. For the standard crossword clue, we have recipe direction for 5. For the cryptic clue, we have mix up first of banks to offer loans for 5. In a standard crossword, the clue defines the answer. The clue recipe direction tells you to look for words that could be a direction in a recipe. You might think about mix or pour, but you were told the word has 5 letters, so you can take a good guess that blend is right. In a full standard grid, you might not be certain about half the clues, but because you get crossing letters from your other answers, the clues you were stuck on become solvable. Now, what is going on with this cryptic clue? How could this ever get us to blend? Well, in a cryptic, you must stop yourself from thinking about the clue as a sentence. The actual information hides beneath the surface. So in every cryptic clue, there are 2 paths to an answer. Hidden somewhere in the clue is a standard definition. This works exactly the same way as a normal crossword clue and defines the word that you're looking for. In this case, mix up is our literal, which gives us blend. If you mix up something, you blend it. The rest of the clue is our second cryptic path to victory. In this instance, we are being asked to take the first letter of banks, producing B, then find a word meaning to offer loans, producing land. Read together, we get blend. So almost every cryptic crossword clue has the same basic structure. We have the surface, which is the whole clue read as a sentence. Underneath the surface, we have 2 parts, the literal, which works in the same way as a standard crossword, and a cryptic, which breaks a word into components and asks you to follow hidden instructions to find it. If you learn to read cryptics properly, they should actually be easier than standard crossword clues, because there are always 2 ways to find your answer. I'm going to explore each of these parts individually, but first, here is the most important rule you need to know to solve cryptics. A cryptic clue must always be divided into 2 parts. This means you can draw a line between literal and cryptic somewhere in the center of the clue. Therefore, the word or string of words that are the literal must either be at the beginning or the end of a clue. In this clue, the literal could not be banks because this would create 3 sections of the clue. It would almost certainly be mix, mix up, loans, or offer loans. This means when you are solving a clue, you only have a few options to consider for your literal. Here's my map of the structure of cryptics. I'm going to break down each of these sections step by step. So let's start by talking about the surface. Cryptic clues will always have a surface meaning that makes sense, but it will almost never have anything to do with the answer that you're looking for. In fact, good clues will deliberately be constructed to misdirect your thinking. In this clue, for example, the surface meaning prompts us to think about mix-up in a different sense to what leads us to an answer. In the surface, mix-up is used to mean confusion or mistake, whereas we actually want to think about it as the act of mixing things together. Similarly, the surface of the cryptic section has absolutely nothing to do with the word blend, but when read as a set of instructions, it gets you there. So the big takeaway is that you must try to ignore the surface meaning. It is your enemy trying to distract you and guide your thinking in the wrong direction. A clue can do this by using words that have multiple meanings, but it can also do it by throwing capitalization, punctuation, and italicization at you. So, second principle about the surface: ignore punctuation. Punctuation choices are purely aesthetic and almost never have anything to do with the actual meaning of the clue. Once again, punctuation is your enemy. There are a couple of exceptions which we'll get to. Under the surface, clues can be broken into 3 possible parts: literal, cryptic, and link. Let's start with links. Before we do, I want to quickly ask that you like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'm a very new and very small channel, and if you like this video, any type of engagement will massively help me to grow. There's so much fun content coming that you don't want to miss. I write and post a new cryptic clue every day for you to solve, and there's also tons more content coming like this, where I break down and explain different types of puzzles. Thank you so much for your support, and back to the video. So, link words. You don't find these in every clue, but sometimes words appear that actually help you to find the location of the split between cryptic and literal. Words that equate or link to things like and, is, and or can act as a hidden equals sign, marking the 2 ways to solve the clues on either side. Words that have the sense of creating something can also do this. Makes, creates, for, and of are often pointing out the divide for you. Occasionally, this link is pointed out with an apostrophe s, playing on the double meaning of apostrophe s as a possessive and contraction. For example, a clue ending in grandma's house might be asking you to read this not as a house that grandma owns, but as a contraction of grandma is house. A cleverly hidden link word. Here are a few examples. Everyone in short dash for US city. Here you're finding all as a substitution for everyone, and short dash is telling you to cut the word dash short, giving you DAS. Then all is going in DAS, giving you the word Dallas. So that's your cryptic section, and the for there is telling you that you solve that for the name of a US city, which is your literal. As a second example, we have small child makes slide. Here, small is being abbreviated to S, that comes from clothing sizes. Then child can be swapped for kid. So S kid makes, it creates the word skid, which is of course another word for slide. Once you identify your literal, here's what you need to know. The literal will always either define your answer or be a synonym of it. The literal for blend could be something like bring several things together, which defines it, or combine, which is a synonym. If it is a synonym, it must be listed as such in a dictionary. For cryptics, dictionaries are sort of a rule book for what is fair, and the most common one used by cryptic crossword setters is chambers. So generally, if it appears in chambers, it is fair to use in a clue. A dictionary is a cryptic solver's best friend, and as you get into cryptics, I would highly recommend either getting a physical copy of Chambers or using their website or app. The other important rule about literals is that they must appear in the tense corresponding to their answer. For example, mixed up would give blended and nothing else. Mixing up, blending, mixes up, blends, and so on. This is really useful as if you think your literal is plural or present participle, it is highly likely your answer will end with an S or an ing. And inversely, if you have a crossing letter that suggests the word ends in S or ing, it can give you a clue about what the literal might be. If I come to mix up first of banks to offer loans, and I have the last letter D from a crossing, it tells me loans is unlikely to be the literal, because it would give me a plural answer. And if the literal definition isn't at the end of the clue, it's got to be at the start. Now you have a theory about your literal definition, it's time to look over at the cryptic section of the clue and figure out how it might be read. Remember, the surface meaning of what you are reading should be entirely disregarded. Instead, you want to look at the cryptic as a set of instructions. Before we talk about what these instructions might be, 3 important notes. First, a cryptic clue will always follow reading order, that is, left to right, unless it tells you otherwise. This means for our blend clue, first of banks to offer loans must give us B, then lend. It cannot give us lend B or any other order. Similarly, an alternate clue that reads mix up loan with bank at first requires the exact same steps, but because of the order of presentation, it must give lend B. So, second point, you will almost never see redundant words in a clue. Puzzle setters are big on minimalism and will do everything they can to construct a clue where every single word is useful. This means when you see articles like an, the, or a, or pronouns like he, she, or they are almost always going to be part of the puzzle. Third, and perhaps most importantly, other than swapping out words for synonyms or abbreviations, you will never be asked to do something that the clue does not explicitly instruct you to do. If you need to get rid of a letter, the clue will tell you. If you need to read something backwards, the clue will tell you. Okay, with that out the way, let's talk about cryptic information. Any word in the cryptic section of the clue can be split neatly into one of 2 categories. Fodder, which are the words that somehow construct the answer, and indicators, which do not go into the answer but instead instruct you to do something. For example, in mix up first of banks to offer loans, mix up is our literal, then first of is our indicator, instructing us to take the first letter of banks, which is fodder. That gives us B. Then to offer loans is fodder, which gives us lend. Usually, fodder exists as a word attached to an indicator, like how banks is attached to first of. In this case, the indicator is telling you to do something to the fodder. The fodder is there to be used and does not contain relevant information. Fodder can also, less commonly, appear separate to indicators, like in the case of to offer loans, which does not have any attached indicators. Fodder can be used as it appears in the clue, like in the case of banks, or it can require a transformation. There are only 2 types of transformations fodder can undergo without indication, being swapped for a synonym or being swapped for an abbreviation. If you are swapping out for a synonym, it follows the same tense rule that our literals do. If the word is in past tense, so must be its replacement. The second part of our blend clue is a perfect illustration for fodder being swapped out for a synonym. To offer loans is swapped out for something that means the same thing, lend. Abbreviations give you shorter strings of letters and can feel overwhelming at first, but there's really just a few common ones that come up. For example, left and right often give you L or R, north, east, south or west can give you N, E, S or W, energy, time and power give you E, T and P from physics, and you can sometimes see elements from the periodic table come up. Usually it's gold for AU, silver for AG, and iron for Fe. I'm sure at this point it can start to feel a little overwhelming, right? If any word can be swapped out for any of its synonyms and its abbreviations, how can you ever solve a clue? Well, the options narrow a lot when you think about a clue in its context. Let's look at this for an example. Love to form a bond that's outstanding. So to start off with, I noticed that's. This looks to me like one of those equal signs we talked about earlier, so I'm betting we split the clue there. If that is right, then our literal meaning is either outstanding or love to form a bond. It seems to me that outstanding is much more likely to be our literal, because there are many more possible words this could designate. I can't think of a 4-letter word meaning love to form a bond. So that is probably the cryptic. Now I know that I'm looking for a 4-letter word meaning outstanding, and I also spotted love here, which is commonly abbreviated to an O. This comes from tennis, where love means 0 points. So now I've got O blank 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 equals outstanding. I'm looking for 3 letters meaning to form a bond. Now I'm scanning for synonyms, but it's not nearly as scary as it might have seemed. I'm not just looking for any word that means to form a bond, I'm looking for a 3-letter word that means outstanding when you put an O in the front. And one jumps out at me, wed, giving us ode. If a balance is ode, it is outstanding. So when you're thinking about synonyms and abbreviations, they appear much less overwhelming when considered in context of the whole clue. A really good tip for getting started, remember a synonym is only valid if it appears in the dictionary. So if you have a theory about a clue, you can consult Chambers for a list of valid synonyms and abbreviations. There's no shame in using a dictionary for every clue as you get started. It will give you a really good sense for what is fair, and as you become more familiar with cryptics, you can have a go at solving on your own. One last note on fodder. As we said, if fodder is substituted, it must strictly be a synonym or definition. So if you were given explorer, you could find the words traveller or scout, or you could find people that are explorers, Drake, Dora, and so on. However, if the clue setter wants you to think more loosely about explorer, they must tell you. The clue must say, explorer say, perhaps explorer, explorer maybe. This can ask you to reach out from explorer in one of 2 ways. Either you want to think about what an explorer might be, settler or sailor maybe. This is rarer and only tends to appear in harder puzzles. Almost always, you are being asked to reach out to a higher order category. So, for example, apple perhaps could give you fruit, and perhaps shorts could give you clothing. You usually find these expansion words in the cryptic section of your clue, but they occasionally pop up as a literal as well, telling you that the answer you're looking for is related rather than directly synonymous. Now for the best part. Let's talk about indicators. These are what make cryptics so wonderfully fun. Indicators have you jumbling up letters, removing them, reading them backwards, and all sorts. However, there is a really pretty short list of 12 actions you can be asked to carry out. All of the indicators are pretty easy to understand, so the puzzle is really in spotting them in the clue. The follow-up videos I'm making are going to deep dive into each of the indicators, but for now, here's each of them with a brief explanation. Selection. Selection indicators are very common and often some of the easiest to spot. They tell you to take particular letters from corresponding fodder. Indicators for selection are words which carry a sense of relative position. We have seen a clear example in first of banks, but we might also find more cryptic indicators like banks initially, asking us to take the initial letter, or banks for starters, asking us to take the starter of banks. You might see other selection positions clued, like food at last, producing food's last letter, D, rebellious outsiders, producing rebellious's outside letters, RS, or belly of beast, producing beast's central letter, A, its belly. Deletion. Deletion indicators are also quite common and can sometimes overlap with selection, as they inversely ask you to remove some letters from the fodder. These indicators, predictably, carry a sense of removal. Spin endlessly asks you to remove spin's last letter, producing SPI. Naked truth asks you to remove truth's clothing, producing rut. A slightly more complicated version of deletion involves using 2 pieces of fodder in the form X minus Y, where cocktails lacking art asks you to substitute cocktails for its synonym martinis, then remove art, producing minis. You might also see abbreviations used for deletion of a particular letter in a word. For example, page cut from copy is asking you to abbreviate page to P, as is commonly seen in books, then remove a P from copy, producing coy. While I'm here, a little note about selection and deletion indicators. If a selection or deletion indicator does not specifically tell you the number of letters to select or remove, then it can only be asking for one letter. So spin endlessly can only remove spin's last letter, and banks for starters can only select bank's first letter. If you need multiple letters, this will be explicitly told to you. Last free lost in office gives you off, and first couple in resort gives you RE. Shuffle. Shuffle indicators ask you to take fodder and swap positions of certain letters. Head to tail in sparkles asks you to place the first letter of sparkles in the last position, producing parkless. These shuffle indicators are relatively rare and in most cases are quite easy to pass because of how specific the instructions are. There aren't many types of shuffles, and I'll cover all of the likely ones in the video on this indicator. Swap. Swap indicators are, like shuffles, pretty rare and are easy to spot because of their specificity. Swap asks you to take a specific letter from the fodder and replace it with another. These occlude with some variant of the structure X replaces Y in Z. For example, the clue leader becoming bachelor in disaster explosion is asking you to find a synonym of disaster where swapping the first letter to B, an abbreviation of bachelor, gives you a word for an explosion. You are looking for doom, which becomes boom. Absorption. Absorption indicators ask you to put fodder inside another fodder, clued in the structure X absorbs Y or X is absorbed by Y. Absorption indicators are easy to understand and really common, but can be difficult to spot because of how broad the range of indicators can be. Words that have the sense of grabbing, taking in, eating, drinking, or learning can all indicate absorption. If a word can in any way relate to something taking another thing, it could be cluing absorption. Frantic Raid captures bishop asks us to place bishop, which can be abbreviated to B from chess notation, and place it inside raid, giving us a word meaning frantic. Rabbit. Order. Order indicators ask you to reposition parts of your clue. These are pretty simple and will be words that indicate order in time or space. Before, after, following, preceding. For example, time following car manufacturer's inspection asks you to find a word for inspection by placing the abbreviation of time, T, after the car manufacturer Audi, giving you audit. Watch out with these ones. Sometimes the puzzle setter can be tricky and use positioning relative to how the string of letters appear in the crossword. This means if the clue is down rather than across, you might see order indicators like supporting or sits on too, because in a down clue, you might visualize a word sitting on another word. Reverse. Reversal indicators ask you to reverse the order of fodder. These indicators are relatively common and are clued by words that carry the sense of turning around, like retreating, turning back, or reversing. For example, but in retrospect asks you to reverse but, providing tub. Once again, be careful with spotting these, as setters pull tricks with down clues, indicating reversals with words meaning going upwards, like rising, uplifted, and written up. Okay, I've saved the best ones till last. Starting off, the bread and butter of cryptics, anagram indicators. So anagram indicators are insanely common. You will see them several times over every crossword you do, and quite often they constitute most if not all of their clue. These indicators ask you to reorganize the letters in fodder to produce a new word. The jumbled fodder can be a single word or a string of words. Here is a really important rule. Indirect anagrams are not allowed. This means everyone has decided it is not fair to ask you to switch fodder for synonyms and then shuffle the letters, because the potential solutions are near infinite. The anagram fodder will always use the letters exactly as they appear in the clue, or their abbreviations on occasion. This makes a lot of anagram clues really easy because you can test your theory by counting the amount of letters in the fodder. That is, if you are looking for a 7-letter answer and the anagram fodder is 7 letters long, you can be pretty confident that you've passed the clue correctly. However, here is the tricky part about anagrams. Their indicators are insanely broad. Almost anything that suggests movement, weirdness, or change can indicate an anagram. Crazy, revolting, at sea, uniquely, refreshed, all valid. This can make them a little hard to spot sometimes, but once you spot them, they're easy to solve. Wild dancing in red fez asks you to find a word for wild by making in red fez dance. It's an anagram indicator, and the word you find is frenzied. Homophone. Homophone indicators are relatively rare, but are so much fun to solve. A homophone is a word or phrase that is pronounced identically to another, but is spelt differently. like here and here, male and male, right and right. Indicators show up as words which suggest vocalization, like reportedly, overheard, it's said. Here's a wonderful clue set by Orpheus for the Times. Buccaneers reportedly in delicate manner. Here, you are searching for a synonym of indelicate manner that, when spoken, sounds like a word for buccaneer. The synonym is coarse air, which sounds like corsair. Hidden. Hidden indicators are by far the easiest of any to solve once you know what you're looking for. These are indicated by words that have the sense of presence or containment, found in, inside, part of. If you spot a hidden indicator, it means that the corresponding fodder, ignoring spaces and punctuation, literally contains the string of letters that provide your answer. For example, in surrounded by part of team on green, you are asked to find a word for surrounded by, which is a part of or hidden in team on green. If you ignore the spaces, part of this string is the word among, which is the answer. Intermittent. Intermittent indicators are, like hidden indicators, really easy to solve once you can spot them. Similar to hiddens, intermittents have the answer contained within the contents of the fodder, but at regular intervals, intermittently. They're clued by words that carry the sense of intermittence, like regularly, every so often, from time to time. Here's a clue to illustrate. Every so often, accused gives signal. Here, we are asked to find a word meaning signal by pulling letters from accused intermittently. We might try this one way, pulling A, C, S, D. This doesn't work. Inversely, C, U, E gives us a three-letter word meaning signal, Q. Translation. Last but not least, translation indicators are probably my favorite sorts of indicators. They ask you to take a word and translate it to how it might be said in a given context. They are incredibly varied in nature, but are always quite easy to spot as they have to be quite explicit. Sometimes you might be asked to translate words into another language. Don't worry, these are near exclusively basic terms in French, German, and Spanish. For example, the Spanish gives you el or la, whereas in Paris a gives you un or un. You might also be asked to abbreviate in SMS form. Over text, you would provide you. The possibilities are pretty extensive, but also quite intuitive and a lot of fun to figure out. Okay, so those are your 12 core indicators. Getting to grips with these will give you the tools to solve 99% of clues that you try. It might be a little overwhelming to consider all of these 12 rules at first, but don't stress. That's in the nature of learning a new game. All of these indicators make so much more sense and come together beautifully with just a little bit of practice. I'd strongly recommend by practicing each one of these indicators individually and building up your toolbox step by step. Watching my in-depth guides on each of the indicators would be a fantastic way to do this. However, I just wanted this video to include all the necessary information to get started. The final piece of the core cryptic playbook is a variant clue type called the double or triple definition. These clues diverge from the fundamental structure where you have a literal and a cryptic section, and instead there's two literal sections. Rarely, in the case of triple definitions, you can have three literal sections. Let's see a few examples. Condemn explosion. Here, condemn defines your answer, and so does explosion. The answer is blast, and if you blast someone, you condemn them, and an explosion is a blast. Then we have thriving source of water. Here, thriving is one literal section, and source of water is another. The answer is well. If you are well, you are thriving, and a well is a source of water. And then the much rarer triple definition, pick holes in weak summary. Here, you have pick holes in as a definition, weak as a definition, and summary as a definition. The answer is run down. If you pick holes in someone, you run them down. If you're weak, you're feeling run down, and if you give someone a summary, you give them the rundown. Now, this may seem pretty intimidating. How can you tell when you're looking at a double definition and not a regular type of clue? Well, it can be tricky sometimes, but here's a really good heuristic. If a clue is incredibly short, it is almost certain to be a double definition. This is because a two-word clue just doesn't have any space for wordplay, and if there's no wordplay, it's a double definition. If it's a medium-length clue, it might be a double definition, and if it's a really long clue, you can be almost certain that it's not. So generally, you can either spot a double definition right away because of its conciseness, or it can just be pretty low on your list of considerations. Now that we have all the necessary information, let's talk about solving. We know how cryptic clues work. How do we solve them? At the most fundamental level, you will solve cryptic clues in two parts. Parsing, which is the process of figuring out how to read a clue, breaking it down into its parts, then solving, which resolves each part to find the answer. Of course, every clue has a different path and every solver a different method. However, what I want to do is lay out a 5-step method to get you started, and you can develop your own rhythm from there. Step 1. Searching. Before you get started with the clue, give it a read over and appreciate how amazing it is that it can precisely lead you to an answer. What a wonderful puzzle. Now, throw away the surface and put your puzzle hat on. The first thing you want to hunt for is words that seem suspicious. Are there any possible link words? Are there any words that seem like they might be indicators? Having these in mind will help you with the next step. Remember, where indicators are, literals are not. At this point, I want to introduce you to a core principle for solving: likelihood. With any good clue, there will be multiple ways to pass information and even more ways to solve it. A clue might have something like 30 strings of letters that can be validly obtained from its cryptic section, and the way to reduce that number and find the correct string faster is to constantly ask yourself, what is the most likely situation here? With that in mind, let's take an example clue and start by searching. Contributor to soap showing everyone in drag. This clue is wonderfully written, where the surface evokes a really strong image of a soap opera full of drag queens. But remember, the surface is there to misdirect you. We want to disregard that image and think about the language as instruction. So let's look for potential link words and indicators. Contributor to feels like a phrase that might be asking us to look at a following word and find something in it. It can't indicate selection because there's no sense of positionality. A selection indicator must tell us where to look in a word. It could be a hidden indicator. Soap doesn't seem to do anything. This must either be fodder or part of the literal. Showing is a pretty strong link word. Contributor to soap is showing everyone in drag. I really like this theory. The only other thing I can spot is in, which can sometimes be a link word, literal in cryptic. But even more commonly is a containment indicator. Something goes inside, in, another thing. Step 2. Splitting. Use your ideas about link words and indicators to figure out where the clue might be split in half. You might have a few plausible readings. Experiment with them one at a time. With this clue, I have two possible readings. Either we have in as a link word, meaning we are looking for a word meaning drag, and contributor to is indicating that the word is hidden inside soap showing. My second option is that showing is our link word, and in is indicating a placement of a synonym of everyone inside a synonym of drag. This would make our literal contributor to soap. I'll favour this second reading based on intuition, but if it doesn't work, I'll come back and try the first. Step 3. Chunking. Our next step is to look at all the possible ways to divide the cryptic section, drawing chunks constituting indicators and corresponding fodder. If I have split correctly, our cryptic clue is everyone in drag. In harder clues, this step will be incredibly important. You'll usually have an idea about the split, but have a good few ways that you might want to pass the cryptic section. With this clue, we already have a good idea of how it works, but we could be wrong. This could be 3 distinct chunks, a word for everyone, in, and drag. But remember, our clue is only 6 letters. This is really unlikely because we would have to find synonyms of an average 2-letter length. We feel pretty solid about in as a containment indicator, so let's have a go at that. Step 4. Solve. Now we have a theory for how a cryptic clue should be read and what it wants us to do. The next step is to test that theory and see if an answer can be produced. So, can we put a word for everyone inside a word for drag and get the soap ingredient? Well, because the answer is only 6 letters, we're looking for really short synonyms. And there's one that jumps out at me for everyone: all. If an event is open to everyone, it's open to all. I really like all here because the string ALL appears in a lot of words. So we have to be careful with misdirection. The clue wants us to think about drag as a performance art, but there aren't many good synonyms. What about drag as a verb? Well, if you drag a car, you tow it. And sure enough, placing all after the T in tow, you get tallow, which is the animal fat contained in soap. Step 5. Evaluate. Now we think we might have an answer, it's time to consider how confident we are in our answer. For our example, we can be almost certain it's right. There are very few other ways to read the clue, and everything slots together perfectly. Occasionally though, you might have 2 answers that sort of work, or an answer that you think is right but you haven't fully understood the cryptic. In these scenarios, you want to think about what the answer does in the context of the whole crossword. If you're right, do the letters conflict with any crossing letters? Does it place weird or rare letters in unusual positions? If so, you might want to re-evaluate. Does your answer confirm your ideas about other clues? If so, you can be even more confident. With this method, you should be set to solve your first cryptic crossword. I just have one more concept to introduce to you, but what I want to do first is just go through a few more examples with you using this method to further cement the process. Feel free to skip to the next part of the video if you aren't interested. A speech about daughter's deep love. Scanning first, I see speech as a potential homophone indicator, about as a potential anagram or containment indicator, and '(s) as a potential link. For this clue, splitting is quite clear if you know what you're looking for. See if you can spot it. Our literal here is deep love, and there are 2 really strong indications. First, the clue starts with A. Remember, clue setters will avoid redundant words. Would the clue stop making sense without the article? No. If the literal was at the beginning of the clue, would there be any difference between speech and a speech? No. Therefore, we can be almost certain that A is part of the wordplay and that our literal is love or deep love. Our second pointer is this possessive on daughter. If you remember earlier, '(s) very often designates our splitting point, so we can go into this clue pretty certain of deep love as our literal. Chunking the cryptic then, speech could be telling us to look for a homophone, and about could be an anagram indicator, as in moving about, or it could be an absorption indicator, as in going around, going about. But let's look at these one by one. I can't think of any homophones here, so I'm open to the possibility I'm missing something, but I'll put it aside for now. If about is an anagram indicator, there are 2 fodder options, either a speech or daughter. These give us either 7 or 8 of our 9 letters, meaning we would need to find 1 letter abbreviation for a speech or a 2-letter word for daughter. Neither of these seem to work, so the most likely pass here is a speech going around daughter, making a word for deep love. If this pass is correct, then I need to look for some good synonyms and abbreviations. Articles like a don't really have much you can do with them. I'm betting that this a goes straight into the answer. That gives us a in first position. Now, I could consult my dictionary and see that son is commonly abbreviated to S and daughter to D. So I'm thinking we have a followed by a word for speech, and this string goes around a D. With A and D taking up 2 letters, I'm looking for a 7-letter synonym of speech that fits the bill. Can you find the answer from here? The synonym you are looking for is oration. To speak is to orate, speech is oration. A speech therefore becomes the string a oration, and slotting in the word D from daughter, we get adoration, meaning deep love. Era of silver finally gone. So in this example, we once again have a really strong pointer for our split. See if you can find it. So in this case, our literal is era, and our cryptic is silver finally gone. This is pointed out to us by of, which is doing the work of an equals sign. Era is made of this. So looking at our cryptic, we want to scan for indicators. Sure enough, finally is a very common selection indicator, telling us to take the final letter of silver or gone. So which is it? Well, the answer is only 3 letters, and we don't have much space to work with. If we took the R from silver, we'd have R blank blank, and would need a 2-letter word meaning gone. I can't find one. How about taking the last letter of gone? Here we get blank blank E and need 2 letters for silver to fill the blanks. Well, silver's periodic symbol is AG. This gives us age, which sure enough means era. Okay, so before we wrap up, there's one last thing. You remember way earlier when I told you that there was one more case where punctuation did have meaning. That is the question mark. A question mark in a clue is kindly placed there by the puzzle setter to let you know that they're doing something unusual. This can warn you of one of 2 things. Almost always, it will mean that the literal is a bit misleading, making use of a pun or a strange way of describing the answer. For example, let's check out this clue for the word anarchist. Section of Norman arch is thrown into disorder. We pass between thrown and into. This is a hidden indicator clue. The cryptic is telling us to take a section of the string Norman arch is thrown, where we can find the word anarchist. Our literal then is into disorder, which an anarchist might be. So because this is a bit of a strange literal, the setter warns us with a question mark. The second reason we might see a question mark come up is to make us aware that the clue is variant in some way. There are a few possible sorts of variants. Sometimes it can just tell you that the setter is pushing the limits of some conventions, maybe using an indicator in an unusual way. For example, this clue from the same puzzle for arbitrage reads, financial juggling random with good earnings primarily for the bottom line. The literal financial juggling is perfectly normal, but the wordplay pushes the boundaries of acceptability. Here, random is swapped for arbitrary, and then the primary letters of good earnings, GE, are replacing the bottom line. This is the section that needs a question mark. A railway line can be abbreviated to RY, and so the bottom line asks us to find the RY at the bottom of the word arbitrary. Then you have variant clues, and there are 2 types of variant clues where a question mark is required to warn you. The first is the cryptic definition, where the clue in its entirety provides an answer. These clues function exactly the same as a standard crossword clue. However, the wording of the clue will deliberately be trying to misdirect you. So you'll have to think of an extremely unintuitive way of interpreting the language. For example, in which rook may fly to mate. This clue wants you to think about a bird flying for mating season, but the cryptic interpretation leads you to think about a rook in chess, flying to checkmate. If something flies, it goes fast, so a rook may fly to mate in speed chess. The second variant is the very rare and-lit clue. Here, the literal is, like in standard crosswords, the whole answer. However, the literal section also contains wordplay that allows you to get to that answer. So the whole clue is both literal and cryptic at the same time. These are insanely tough to construct as clues and are always such a joy to come across. Here's an example. Extraordinarily angered. Here, extraordinarily angered defines the word enraged, which is the answer. But enraged can also be reached through wordplay, where extraordinarily is an anagram indicator telling you to jumble up the words in angered, and angered happens to have the exact same string of letters as enraged. You can also sometimes see a semi-andlit, where the whole clue is a literal definition and some but not all of that definition is also wordplay that gets you to the answer. For example, I delay every so often, it's how I behave. The cryptic section of this clue is I delay every so often. I goes straight into the answer in first position, and then every so often is an intermittent indicator, telling you to take every other letter from delay, D-L-Y. If someone delays every so often, they behave idly, so the whole clue provides the answer while still containing a cryptic section. So that really is everything you need to know about cryptics to get started. I know that this video was packed with information and maybe makes starting to solve these puzzles feel a little overwhelming. But as with learning a language, the more you engage with it, the more natural it feels. I hope that this video can act as a guidebook. Having watched this, you should now know enough about cryptics to get started with solving, and as things confuse you, perhaps you can come back to sections of this video as a refresher. I'll be working on some deeper dives into the indicators soon, so stay tuned for that. I put a lot of work into this video, so if you want to support me, you can subscribe and leave a comment. If you want to even further offer your support, my Patreon will be linked in the description. I'd love to make videos about puzzles full time, and your support could help me do that. All that being said, thank you so much for watching. I hope I've made cogs turn, and I'll see you for the next one.